Jack, Iron Wolf. Mercer had spent nearly half his life chasing highways that never ended, riding from frozen plains to crowded cities with the loyal brotherhood of the Hells Angels always close behind him. And as Christmas lights began appearing along storefronts and lampposts, he felt heavier than usual, weighed down by memories he could never outrun. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Jack wasn't a cruel man, just a scarred one, shaped by cold nights, loud engines, and choices that seemed right at the time, but aged badly with every passing year. And the deepest regret he carried was the empty space where his daughter Emily should have been. After Emily's mother passed away years ago, just days before Christmas, the house felt too quiet, the grief too loud, and Jack convinced himself that a man like him had no place raising a child. So he left Emily with her aunt, promising money, protection from afar, and a future reunion he kept delaying. Seasons changed, Christmases came and went, and Emily grew older, sending letters decorated with snowflakes and reindeer that Jack never opened, not because he didn't care, but because he was afraid of what he'd lost. On a bitter Wednesday morning in December, as icy wind cut through his jacket and holiday music drifted faintly from a gas station radio, Jack felt a sudden, crushing twist in his chest, like the world itself had grabbed him by the collar and shaken him awake. And without explaining a word to anyone, he turned his bike toward the small town where Emily attended middle school. He told himself it would be simple, just a quiet visit before Christmas break. No presents, no promises, just a father standing there to prove he hadn't disappeared completely. But the moment he reached the school, decorated with paper wreaths and blinking lights, something felt wrong. The yard was silent, students clustered tightly together, teachers speaking in hushed, nervous voices. And then Jack saw it. Emily's backpack ripped open, one strap hanging loose, lying against a brick wall dusted with frost, and his breath caught so hard it felt like pain. He pushed through the doors and rushed down the hallway. Christmas art taped crookedly to the lockers, until he found Emily curled up behind a row of metal doors, her hands shaking as she wiped tears from her face. And when she looked up and saw him standing there, disbelief flashed across her eyes before she ran into his arms, holding on like she was afraid he'd vanish again. Between sobs, she told him how 3 boys had tormented her for months, mocking her worn clothes, whispering about her mother, laughing about her biker father, and how that morning, when she tried to walk away, one of them shoved her hard onto the cold floor while a teacher looked on and did nothing. Jack felt anger surge through him like a storm, but beneath it was something sharper and more painful, a deep shame for not being there sooner. And as the low rumble of distant engines echoed outside in the winter air, the school seemed to tremble, not with fear, but with the promise that this Christmas, things were finally going to change. As more than 200 Hells Angels motorcycles rolled into the school parking lot under a pale December sky, their headlights cutting through the cold air like glowing ornaments, the entire street seemed to freeze in place, as if time itself had stopped to watch. Christmas decorations trembled on nearby poles as teachers halted mid-step, parents slammed brakes and stared from their cars, and students crowded the windows, whispering in stunned disbelief while the bikes formed a wide, protective circle around the building, engines rumbling low and steady like the heartbeat of some massive winter giant. Jack stood calmly at the center of it all, snow crunching beneath his boots, with Emily gripping his gloved hand, her small fingers tight but steady, her wide eyes filled not with fear, but with wonder, because for the first time in her life, she was seeing her father not as a distant shadow or a whispered rumor, but as a man who commanded respect without raising his voice. Christmas music drifted faintly from a nearby house, clashing strangely with the sound of chrome and steel, yet somehow it fit, like a reminder that protection and warmth came in many forms. Emily looked around at the riders, men and women bound by loyalty rather than blood, and she understood that this was her father's family, a brotherhood that treated promises like sacred vows. The school principal hurried outside, his scarf crooked, face drained of color, breath fogging in the cold as he tried to speak over the engines, stammering that this was unnecessary, that it was almost Christmas break and things could be handled quietly. Jack stepped forward, his voice calm, steady, and sharp enough to cut through the winter air, saying simply that his daughter had been hurt, that she had asked for help and been ignored, and that pretending it would all disappear with the holidays was no longer an option. The principal tried to explain, blaming misunderstandings and busy schedules, but Jack raised one hand, stopping him mid-sentence, his eyes holding the man in place with a look that carried years of hard roads and harder lessons. Without anger, without shouting, Jack motioned toward three riders standing nearby. Tank, Razor, and Ghost, their jackets dusted lightly with snow, their faces unreadable, men built like mountains who didn't need to threaten to be taken seriously. As they walked toward the school doors, Christmas wreaths shook slightly from the vibration of their boots on the pavement, and inside, teachers straightened their backs, and students moved quickly out of the way, not because a single hand was raised, but because presence alone can speak louder than force. The halls fell silent as the riders passed, their reflections stretching across shiny floors decorated with holiday banners. And in that quiet, something shifted, a clear message that this season of giving would also be a season of accountability. Outside, Jack knelt slightly to Emily's level, squeezed her hand, and promised her that this Christmas she wouldn't feel small or alone ever again, while the engines continued their steady rumble, not as a threat, but as a shield wrapped firmly around her. Within minutes, the three boys responsible were located and brought into the hallway, standing beneath paper snowflakes taped to the ceiling, their earlier confidence completely gone as their hands shook and their faces drained of color. The tough masks they wore every day at school melting away in the quiet weight of accountability. Tank slowly knelt in front of the one who had led the bullying, meeting his eyes without raising his voice, and spoke calmly, telling him that if he ever laid a hand on Emily again, he wouldn't be facing anger or fists, but the full consequences of an entire family that never forgot and never abandoned its own. A message that landed harder than any threat ever could. The halls were silent except for distant Christmas bells chiming from the intercom, and Jack stepped forward, insisting that each boy look Emily in the eye and apologize properly, not out of fear, but understanding, and one by one they did, their voices unsteady yet sincere, shoulders slumped as they admitted what they'd done wrong. Emily stood there listening, her heart pounding, then took a step forward on her own, shoulders straight, chin lifted, the cold fear she'd carried for months slowly loosening its grip as she realized she wasn't invisible anymore. Outside, the Hell's Angels waited in the cold winter air, clapping in slow, steady approval as she emerged beside her father, the sound echoing off brick walls decorated with holiday lights. And in that moment, Emily felt something new, not protection born from intimidation, but warmth born from love and presence. Jack, known to many as Iron Wolf, knelt down in front of her right there in the frost-covered courtyard, his voice breaking softly as he apologized for the years he missed, for every Christmas spent apart, for every letter left unopened, and promised that he wasn't riding away this time. Emily wrapped her arms around him with all the strength she had, holding on as if anchoring him to the ground, and Jack felt her forgiveness settle deep into him, heavier and more healing than any burden he'd ever carried. The riders revved their engines in a thunderous yet joyful salute, the sound rolling through the winter air like a strange but beautiful carol, marking a moment that none of them would forget. What began as an unplanned visit during the Christmas season became a turning point that reshaped everything, teaching the school that silence was not neutrality, showing the bullies that respect mattered, giving Emily the confidence to speak and stand tall, and leading Jack Mercer back to the place he had run from for far too long. Before leaving, Jack turned toward the students gathered on the steps, scarves pulled tight against the cold, and reminded them quietly that family was not just blood, but those who stood up when it mattered. As the motorcycles finally rolled away, engines fading down the highway lined with Christmas lights, Emily slipped her hand into her father's, asked if they could spend the day together, and Jack smiled with a full, peaceful heart, knowing that this Christmas wasn't about the road anymore, but about staying.